bad.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo, also known as Ricky Francis, and a great episode for you today. I'm laughing because I almost messed that up again. Dr. Robert Malone is with us today. If you guys aren't familiar with him, he's the inventor of the mRNA technology. The technology, which is now a household name because of Pfizer and Moderna. It's the technology they use in their COVID vaccine. And we had an amazing conversation. One of the beautiful things about doing this podcast is when I get somebody on a little longer, when they're willing to stay for over an hour, maybe 2 hours, it's just fun to see where the conversation takes you. And because I'm constantly trying to have a casual conversation, because that's what I really enjoy, and I want to make sure that I can share some really important and interesting information, but also I want to enjoy this. And really, I can do both at the same time. And luckily, because of the casualness of the show, it leads to some really interesting podcasts. And today is no different. He's been interviewed on many shows, like he's been on Tucker Carlson, he's been on The Last American Vagabond, he's been on Del Big Trees, The High Wire. But I think you'll get a different perspective, other shades of his history on this show and this conversation. It was really a pleasant conversation. I really had fun talking to him. And it's just one of those shows where, like, after the show, I'm just like, wow, that was awesome. I'm so glad I got to capture that and record it, and I get to share it with people, because sometimes you have amazing conversations. It could be anywhere. It could be at the gym. You end up having a conversation with somebody, and you're like, wow, that was an awesome conversation. You end up sharing some really interesting perspectives or ideas, or it can happen at a bar. You know, somebody sits next to you. But to be able to record them and then share them where people can listen to them and have that experience with you and go on that journey, I truly believe it's priceless. I'm already making this intro long. It's a long podcast, and I'm really excited about you guys listening to it. So let me just go right into the other stuff. This is a Value for Value show. What that means is if you get some value out of this, try to give some value back. It doesn't have to be financially. If you can't support the show financially, no big deal. Share the show, review the show, tell people about the show, post the show on your social media platforms or wherever you're at. Also, I do have a merch store, the Ripple Effect Podcast, merch.com, if you want to support the show that way. Also, I have a Patreon page if you want to support me there. I have a Rockfin channel if you want to support me there. I have a PayPal account if you want to tip the show. All that stuff will be in the show description. That's it. Enjoy this podcast. Hopefully you guys will enjoy it as much as I enjoyed having it. And I'll talk to you guys on the next one. Peace. Do you hear me?
I can. So, how shall I speak to you, Ricky or Rick or what?
Ricardo, Ricky, Rick, well, whatever you want to call me, it's fine. I mean, most people call me Ricky, but it's whatever.
Senor Ricky. Okay, we're good to go. Thanks. I just wanted to check. So, yes, I've accepted your recording authorization, and it seems. How's the audio? Is this acceptable?
Yeah, it sounds good. I mean, I recorded in the Pro Tools, so if by any chance afterwards I feel like I can clean it up a little bit, I always can do some audio editing and try to clean it up a little bit. But more or less, it sounds
brilliant.
Sounds good. And I really appreciate you coming with me. By the way, this is I don't cut anything out. I don't the way it's recorded is the way it's released. So if I sound like an idiot, which is typical, it stays in there, and I don't clean it up. But thank you so much for being with me. I can't thank you enough for being outspoken and for the courage and to be outspoken in a time where it's really tough to be, because anytime you're outspoken about the current events, people get really worked up. People are very emotional about these topics. So first, I just want to thank you for having the courage to do these interviews. And
Just a sec. Sorry, Ricky. Yes, thank you. I apologize.
Oh.
I'm just signaling to my wife to get me my coffee. Okay, carry on. I apologize.
Where are you located, Dr. Malone?
West Virginia, I'm sorry, Virginia, Central Virginia in Madison County, which is just south of the Northern Virginia complex at the foothills of the Shenandoah on our 50-acre horse farm.
Awesome.
So that's probably more information than you wanted.
No, it's a right. Yeah, I mean, I'm in the East Coast. I'm in Massachusetts. I'm also on the East Coast. So it's born in Portugal, raised in Massachusetts, but
Really, born in Portugal. Well done. So we raised the Lusitano horse.
Oh, nice.
Which is yes. So we go to Portugal every chance we get, and we'll be there this fall for the big Lusitano show in Cage.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I came here when I was 4. I remember hearing your story in some interviews talking about how, basically to be at peace, you just have to be on your farm with your family, and you don't really need much for, to be happy. And that's a common theme I'm constantly talking about on this show, is just watching my parents come from, because we're from northern Portugal. I was born in Chaves, and my parents were just, they're farmers. They came from a history of farmers. They didn't have material things. They didn't have running water, but they had huge families. They always had wine. My dad makes wine. My grandfather made wine. My great grandfather makes.
I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Yes. So the best wine in the world, Porto. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because like not a lot of people, I feel like Portuguese wines, like the little hidden secret of wines, because not a lot of people, like you go to a liquor store, a lot of people don't seek out the Portuguese wine, but I mean, they really have some phenomenal wine from Portugal, and at a really inexpensive price because of the market.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Their reds are really a strong suit. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Don't buy Portuguese wine because the cost will go up and then I can't afford it.
You're right. I rarely will. If I buy a inexpensive wine, like and I drink wine every night with dinner, so I can't afford to be drinking the most expensive wines all the time. But and usually there's the gems in the middle, right? Like you have the really cheap stuff that's going to give you a headache, and usually that's what scares people off with wine. And then you have the gems in the middle, and then you have the high end stuff, and you can find a bunch of really good wines in the middle. And there's just something about the whole experience of like opening a bottle. The kids are asleep, the wife and I open a bottle, we don't know what it's going to taste like, what it's going to smell like. We open it, we're enjoying it together, we're having a conversation about if we like it, if we don't like it, if we're snacking on something, how the taste changes while we're eating. And it's just like this fun little experience. But the reason why this is relevant is because, like you were talking about in other interviews about how you're at peace on that farm. I think, that's knowing a little bit about somebody's character and where they come from and their origin story. I think also it's like anything, like knowing the history of something helps you better understand the now. And so knowing who you are as a person, it kind of gave me a good idea of why you would have the courage to come out and talk and say and just be outspoken about your opinions and what you're seeing, which shouldn't be dangerous. I mean, really, the idea of one of the guys that now Wikipedia and everybody else, history is being rewritten as we speak, but the inventor of the mRNA technology being censored for talking about the technology that he actually was a part of inventing is so absurd that it blows my mind. But enough about wine. I'm sure a lot of people get mad at me all the time on the show because I'll get a guest on that's an expert in one field, and I'll get them going on a rant about something else that I find fascinating, but maybe the listeners don't find fascinating.
Well, so let's just close this out by saying, as a native Californian, I love Portugal because the sun sets over the right part of the ocean. You got mountains at your back. The beaches are bloody awesome. It's got some of the best surf in the world. And it's less densely populated, and it has real castles. What's not to like? So enough about Portugal. I'm There's no conflict of interest here. I'm not sponsored by TAP Airways. Over.
I remember flying TAP when I was a kid. That's so funny. Yeah, it's a beautiful country. I know a lot of people who travel the world, and maybe, you know, I'm a little biased, but hearing it from other people about how friendly the people are there, it makes me feel good, you know, about the country. It's also a very neutral country. They don't get involved in many of the world's conflicts, and I think that helps a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of Swiss in that way, and they've survived an authoritarian dictatorship.
So,
and that has had profound cultural impacts. And in my experience, they're experiencing a cultural renaissance, particularly in women who have not had a role outside of the home historically. I see as very engaged. And what I find fascinating is the young adults in Portugal are just intellectually engaged in a way that I don't see as much in the United States.
yeah, that's probably true. I mean, we would go there for a month or two in the summer, so my experience there and my knowledge there is limited. I mean, I talked to family there and stuff like that, but yeah, I mean, it is, you know, there's tons of beautiful things about the country. I hope we just helped with their tourism a little bit because I know after 2020, so,
they've been hammered.
yeah.
And they're still in the jaws of this thing. I did a podcast with a young Portuguese reporter, and was glad of the opportunity. And so enough said. But yes, it's a lovely place, lovely culture. And as a California native, I just feel comfortable there, even though I don't speak Portuguese.
Yeah, it is very California-like in regards to people hanging out at the beach and the wine culture and people just enjoying being outside and being around each other and the simple things. I mean, I think that's really important. We can get so caught up in life, and especially in the East Coast, fast-paced lives that sometimes we just need to hit the brakes and just kind of enjoy the simple little things we've been enjoying for centuries. So, but in regards to your origin story, let's get right into because I feel like your origin story is very interesting, and there's a lot of little tidbits that I think are fascinating about it, and it goes parallel obviously with the history of the mRNA technology, which I'm sure a lot of people are interested in, and probably much more interested than our love for Portugal. But can we get into just how a little bit of your background, you know, your history, and then how it led you to the mRNA technology?
Okay, so that's we use the Wayback Machine for that one. This goes back to me as a undergraduate at UC Davis, having transitioned from being a computer science student. I like to say I left computer science for biology because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life staring at a computer monitor in a room with no windows. And now I stare at a computer monitor in a room, but I make about 25% of what I might have made if I had stayed on the computer science track, which is why both of my sons are computer scientists. So there it is. I decided, you know, for a variety of reasons, I was motivated to be a physician and to get involved in molecular biology and molecular virology. It was just a passion. And at the time, breast cancer research. So I just became a lab rat as an undergraduate in a key laboratory in the School of Medicine, the Department of Pathology, with these individuals mentoring me, Murray Gardner and Bob Cardiff. Bob was recently from the Nobel Prize-winning lab at UCSF that had discovered oncogenes. So we were very focused in that laboratory on breast cancer and the mouse mammary tumor virus model, which is a retrovirus. While I was there, Murray and Preston Marks and others in 1983 and early 1984 established that it was a retrovirus responsible for a immunodeficiency syndrome in monkeys. At the time, I recall clearly, everybody knew, and this is kind of an important story in terms of understanding groupthink and medicine and consensus. Everybody knew that AIDS was caused by semen getting into the blood and the abuse of amyl nitrate poppers. That's what caused AIDS, full stop. And the retrovirus hypothesis was initially rejected. And it was my mentor, Murray. You can, if you ever watch the old HBO film And the Band Played On, Murray went with Bob Gallo to visit Luc Montagnier. And I remember him coming back to the lab, almost dancing down the hall, bragging that he had the virus that caused AIDS in his pocket. He clearly brought it through customs without authorization. So that's my true origin, is in that lab doing molecular biology, southern blots and northern blots, which require that you be quite skilled at manipulating nucleic acids and purifying them. So that's how I learned to work with RNA. There's these various origin stories having to do with this thing. Coming off of that, I became convinced that the good thing for a young physician scientist entering an MD PhD program as myself to do was to commit your life to gene therapy, retroviral vector gene therapy. And this was a hot idea at the time in the mid 80s. Now, are we having a bandwidth problem? You there still?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Ricky?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, I just the video installed. So coming out of that environment, I wish to commit my career and my scientific career and training to the idea that was developed having to do with the use of retroviral vectors for gene therapy purposes. And I sought out an opportunity to do that, and the best place in the world was the Salk Institute and University of California, San Diego, where Ted Friedman and Verma were both working. So I was cautioned not to go to Inder's lab at the Salk because it was an insanely competitive, basically cutthroat postdoc lab, and I was just a graduate student. But you know, in retrospect, my young ego thought that this was going to be a good place for me to go, and I didn't heed the warnings. I probably should have. So I landed in Inder's lab working on retroviral vectors and wanted to ask questions about the packaging of these retroviruses. Retrovirus is a virus that exists outside of the cell in an RNA form and then is converted to a DNA form using reverse transcriptase. That's why it's called retro, not because it's from the 1850s or something. That's the nature of that. And so it's an RNA that gets packaged. And so I wanted to be able to introduce RNA, synthetic RNA, into packaging cells and ask questions about the structure of those RNA and the sequences necessary for packaging. Simple stuff, but this is what you got to do as a grad student, is you got to figure out something to do. So that was the driver. In order to do that, I had to establish the technology for producing such RNAs at high quality and high quantity so that I could do multiple experiments with the same batch. And I had to develop a method that really wasn't an efficient method for putting RNA into cells. And a cascade of events happened that enabled that. But meanwhile, I was being mentored by a postdoc named Dan St. Louis, who was doing studies involving use of retroviruses to transfer genes into mouse cells and then reimplant those mouse cells into the mouse so that they would express a foreign protein. And Dan's experiments went along, and then he ran into a brick wall. For some reason, the expression of the foreign protein would stop in the mice after 3 weeks, approximately. And this was a big paradox, since the other part of Inder's lab was focused on gene expression. That's the control of transcription, et cetera. So turning genes on and off. The dominant hypothesis was that there was some sort of gene silencing going on that was turning off these foreign retroviral sequences. And being the half-trained medical student that I was, I poured through the books and came to the conclusion that it was an immune response against the foreign protein. At the time, this was heresy in the gene therapy world because it meant the whole intellectual construct of gene therapy was not going to work. the idea that you would correct inborn errors of metabolism by putting in the good gene instead of the bad gene. So that's the simplest distillation of Ted Friedman's, brilliant insight in the 70s that gave rise to the gene therapy concept. And the problem is that the immune system doesn't care that it's the good gene or the bad gene. What it cares, functionally, I'm ascribing, intellect to the immune system. That's evolutionarily, it recognizes difference, and it deletes the cells that recognize your normal self. And in the case of a child that has an inborn error of metabolism, the bad gene, the one that's causing the disease, is recognized as the normal gene immunologically. So you put in the good gene, and you think, oh, I'm going to fix this, this young child that has this defect. But in fact, the immune system of that child looks at that and says, no. This is a foreign gene, and I'm going to kill the cells that are expressing it. And that's what happened with Dan's experiment. And that insight was immediately, for me, transparent that this was going to be a major problem for the thing that I'd committed my life to, gene therapy, but that this other past part of my life could come into play. We could make vaccines rather than gene therapies using the same technology. And there's reasons why they might work better in terms of cellular immune response, for example. So that was the genesis. From that lab then came two core technologies. One was my thread, which was mRNA synthesis, delivery, expression in cells and tissues. The other one was the senior postdoc in the lab, a gentleman named Dinko Valerio, was at the very cutting edge of adenovirus vector development. He left the lab and created a company called Crucell in the Netherlands, and came to me about 3 years later after we both left the lab and said, Robert, you're right. I need to pivot Crucell from being a gene therapy lab to being a gene therapy company to being a vaccine company. Crucell exploded at that point and was sold to Johnson & Johnson, and that's the genesis of the J&J vaccine. So when people say, are these gene therapies, these mRNA and adenoviral vectored vaccine technologies, this is a tomato argument, in terms of nomenclature, but the truth is that they are both gene therapy technology of different types applied to the vaccine indication. They can also be used for more classic gene therapy type strategies, RNA silencing strategies, many other things. They're about delivering foreign genetic material into the cells, and there's a spectrum of applications. One of those, and one of the easiest ones, is vaccines, because vaccines don't require something that's super efficient for gene transfer. They just require a little bit of protein. So they're the kind of the low-hanging fruit entry-level application for gene therapy technologies. And what we're seeing is 30 years later, the embodiment of this concept with two key enabling discoveries that have happened since then. In my case, the discoveries were around that we can coat the RNA with a positively charged fat and deliver it into cells and tissues, and that in some cases, you don't even need that. You can just inject it directly. So that was the Vical science paper that was roundly dismissed by the equivalent of the trolls back in 1990 when it was published, and it was likened to cold fusion and inappropriate that science should have even published it, and it was crazy talk. And then it was reproduced in thousands and thousands of laboratories all across the world and gave rise to DNA vaccines because that was it yielded a large number of patents filed in late 1989 that actually mid-89 that covered all of these ideas and technologies. And they were owned by the company that I left the Salk and joined called Vical. Vical licensed them to Merck at a time when Maurice Hilleman was still there, so the founder of kind of mid-century pediatric vaccines. And Merck, in their terms and conditions, insisted that they be allowed to take credit for those discoveries in terms of public communications, advance them. And they were very aggressive, both Merck and Vical, in keeping anybody else from developing either RNA or DNA vaccines for the life of the patents, so about 20 years. So no surprise that the whole field was killed, except for Merck and Vical trying to advance it for 20 years unsuccessfully. They spent well over $1 billion. No products came out of it. The patents expired. Vical went bankrupt and was dissolved essentially through a reverse merger kind of thing. And then you had an explosion of new companies like CureVac, BioNTech, et cetera. And that's what gives us the position we're in today. The other key variable that came into play that made this happen was a Darpa program specifically targeting mRNA, gene therapy, and vaccines. And that's what capitalized Moderna. So Moderna is a product of Darpa. The Moderna vaccine that we're all familiar with was actually engineered at the Vaccine Research Center at NIH, which was kind of a porting of Vical into the public sector. That's how the VRC was created, and has continued to pursue the ideas behind Vical. And the two key breakthroughs, certainly the Carrico and Weissman finding about the immunogenicity of RNA and the benefits of engineering it so it has a slightly different composition. That's an important one. It's not enabling fully, but it makes things work a little better. The thing that was really transformational was the work of Peter Cullis and his team in University of British Columbia up in Canada, who've been working on these problems for 40 years. And they came up with a better set of lipids in formulation technology. And their stuff is used directly by CureVac and BioNTech, Pfizer, and then a reverse engineered version of it is what's used by Moderna. So there's the short history of RNA vaccines as I've experienced it. Other people have different points of view, and threaded into it as my origin history. What's dropped from what I just described was that when I had those discoveries at the Salk, there ensued a huge dust-up between the Salk and UC San Diego about who owned the technology and who was going to get the patents and who was going to get the money from the patents and all this kind of stuff. And I was a little flea in the midst of elephants and was being told to do this or do that and don't do it with the other people, et cetera, and experienced some pretty hard stuff. And I ended up with PTSD. So that is also part of my origin story, is that I got to experience big science, good and hard. And it left me a little bit scarred. And that's another reason why I enjoy hanging out with my horses, is it's very therapeutic, frankly.
Yeah, well, I think that's the interpretation people get of science, that it's all about just evidence-based information and studies, and they don't. I almost think a lot of people forget it's a business, and there's a lot of business practices that happen in all industries, including science and medicine. And when you have for-profit industries, it doesn't matter what the product is, you're going to have the same type of battles. I know with our mutual friend Del Bigtree, when you were talking on there, you were interviewed on his show, The High Wire, you were talking about how, once conversations about these patents and who got these patents came about, all of a sudden everybody started smelling blood, and it got kind of aggressive. And I
wouldn't say blood, I would say Benjamins. Is what they were smelling. Yeah.
And so, being a middleman, being in the midst of all this, I mean, you probably just felt like, hey, isn't the information important? Isn't it, like, did it completely change your perspective?
So this was the cognitive dissonance, you're touching on it, that resulted in my little breakdown. Is I was at the temple. Understand, there's half a dozen Nobel laureates there at the Salk at the time, and Jonas Salk. Francis Crick was there. I had gone to the temple of science, I believed, and I thought it was a pure noble pursuit. And I ran smack into the wall of what it really is. it's like you say, it's about money and power and business and status and fame and fortune, and it all gets embodied in what I call Nobel Prize fever when that comes about. And frankly, we're right in the middle of it. There are many people that are convinced and are trying to convince the world that they deserve the Nobel Prize for their contributions. Maybe this underlies some of the write Robert out of history part, which is documented and is happening. There's a lot of motives, but for me, that what you just touched on was the core of my cognitive dissonance. Is I had come into this naive and believing in an ideal about science and truth that just had to, didn't survive an encounter with reality, let's say gently.
Yeah, that's I think that's a really important part of the story. And I know very famous Canadian YouTuber, what's her face? She does a bunch of little videos, kind of comedian. Yeah, she just did a video on you and on how, like, basically
who is Robert Malone? I think it was a riff on who is John Galt. But I speculate. I can't get in her head.
Yeah.
But I'm very grateful for what she put out.
Yeah, and she, just talking about how they're rewriting history and they're changing your Wikipedia and all this stuff. And it's, that's the thing, this whole experience really shows how history can be rewritten, and how we constantly, when you talk to historians, you constantly regurgitate, history is written by the winners, history is written by the winners. And it's like when you see it in real time, you realize how easy that can be. Because, for example, I have a 6-year-old and I have a 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. They're one day might look back and want to Google or research, like, what happened in 2020? What a crazy time. I know my dad's interpretation of it, but like, let me do some research on what really happened. All they're going to find is the articles that, mainstream science, mainstream media, corporations and the government want to force feed the public. And you're not going to find maybe this interview or find other interviews with other people that are outspoken. So you're basically, rewriting history and changing the perception of this timeline forever, because you're suppressing certain information. And that's something.
So what I find fascinating in this is the academics only cite their literature. Okay. And at the time, recognized I was an industrial scientist, so I didn't control what got published. It had to pass through the corporate veil. And in fact, the corporation Vical aggressively sought to keep me from continuing to do research in the field that I'd created during the life of the patent. Not only did they block everybody else, they tried to block me. Okay. So that's just the way this hardball works. And what I find fascinating is the academics only cite the academic literature. They don't cite the patent literature. And so they, even though they've read these patents and they're out there and they describe all of these ideas, this also happened with the DNA vaccine story. There were many people who asserted that they had invented it years after I had, done. You've heard the story. That's how it happened. And it's captured in the patents, but they won't cite the patents. They won't cite the data that's in the patents, and they assert repeatedly. There are multiple review papers that are fascinating to read, and they get my wife just mad as hell because they talk all around this, and even those papers that are out there, they either don't cite them or they only cite, for instance, in Wiki, they cite the institution. They don't name my name or the people that actually did it. But then for their stuff, it's extensively cited in, every little drib and drab, quoting names. So it is, there's the appearance of a very conscious strategy. And it's been reinforced through mainstream media and messaging. So just to name a name, my good friend Katie Carrico, that I actually mentored in the mid-90s and introduced her to this field, which is why she cites me as an acknowledgement on her first RNA paper. She's been actively promoted in the mainstream media, consequent to both BioNTech and UPenn lobbying, I believe, as the original inventor of all this stuff. and they tell a story of her hardship. And I don't discount that it was hard being a Hungarian immigrant. What they leave out is that she was also a Hungarian spy during a dictatorship, but that's conveniently glossed over. And I'm written out. So it is, people ask me, why have you and your wife raised these issues? It just got to the point where the being written out of history was so egregious that we felt that we had to say something.
Well, what came?
And that's.
I was going to say.
Go ahead.
What started? What came first, or what did you start witnessing first? Did you start being outspoken and kind of being your concerns about the vaccines and what was going on? Did that happen first? Then you start seeing the overdrive on rewriting history, or was it rewriting history?
No. The rewriting history was pretty clear, and I've been living with that my whole career. And
why is
why is it? Because people want fame and fortune. Being credited with having a seminal role in a technology leads to things like juicy appointments as a vice president of BioNTech, or a full professorship with a nice laboratory and subsidy at University of California, Irvine, or that's how this goes. People, by leveraging this type of storyline, there's direct benefits. Katie Carrico has won 2 major prizes for her work here, and one from Switzerland and one from Spain, as I recall, and another one here in the States from a European philanthropist, let's say. So there's direct financial benefits. There's all kinds of legitimacy and other peripheral benefits that flow from this. For me, like you said, a hard lesson learned from the Salk was that all of this passion and drama around seeking fame and fortune does not lead to happiness. And I think a lot of it, you can imagine I've done a lot of introspection. Why do people behave this way? It's kind of part of my story also, trying to understand that. I think it's about seeking immortality and about filling some gap in one's soul. And what I hear again and again from people that have chased this dragon successfully or unsuccessfully is the storyline, I wish I'd spent more time with my kids when they're older. And my wife and I, for whatever reason, are very aware of that. We've been married, we're high school sweethearts. We've been married over 40 years, and we're committed to ourselves, our children, and living well and ethically. And I knew that to chase this dragon, there's this saying I posted on Twitter the other day, when people were expecting me to go after LinkedIn after they apologized and they, you should sue them and blah, blah, blah. I said, look, the man who seeks revenge should first dig 2 graves. And I think that's a pretty important little fragment of wisdom. So you can fight this and you end up in just down in the mud, wrestling with the pigs. And it doesn't bring happiness. It doesn't bring, inner peace. And now I'm in my early 60s, and I'm some saying, Robert, you're an elder now. But if I can share that to my younger colleagues, there comes a time when all of that drama and churn becomes increasingly irrelevant. And you look back, what did you actually do in your life? Did you make a difference? Did you contribute to things being better? Did you take care of your family and your kids and live a good moral life? And I'm not a religious person. Sorry to disclose that. It's just not how I'm wired. I'm a scientist, and that's the way it is. But I don't disparage others who have strong religious beliefs. It's just how I am. But I don't think that means that you shouldn't care for your fellow human, and you shouldn't seek to live a moral life. So that's my logic. That's how I've come to peace with it. But I've also kind of packed a lot of those events away in my brain so that I'm not constantly battling the PTSD. And this has brought some of that out. What triggered a lot of this was out of the blue, I got a call from a Swiss journalist who said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about the RNA story." And I was gobsmacked. You know, first person that's ever contacted me wanting to talk about it. And we had packed all that data away in a box and put it away for 30 years. And he wanted the details. So we started hauling that out, picking through it, remembering things that I had long suppressed. And Jill, my wife, felt pretty passionate about this and about the rewriting of history and other things. And so she hauled it all out and wrote a storyline around it and posted the documents, and you can find them on our website. And now I get the, well, you're not really the inventor of RNA, all the trolls, you know, they all come out. And so I just say, okay, well, you know, there are patents issued. Here's a link. You can see the patents, you can see the data, make your own decision. It also was comforting. I'm sharing more here than I ever do. So if I'm talking too much, tell me to shut up.
But, no. I think this is a very interesting part of the whole story, and I love hearing the very human aspect of people and their stories. I think we can get so caught up in just information, and then behind that information are people with stories, personal stories.
So about 93. I've managed to finish my MD. I've done my internship in pathology. I've won a bunch of big grants. I'm setting up a gene therapy program at UC Davis, and which is kind of unprecedented as at that stage in my career to have, $1 million plus in the bank for grants and contracts and be recruiting more senior faculty member into a program. And it was a little bit of a pirate operation, frankly, not really endorsed by the dean. But it's what was going on. And I get this call from somebody at the Karolinska saying, "Hey, would you like to fly out and talk to me?" And so I'm going to hold on to the names to protect the innocent. So I fly out to Karolinska and I talked to, I think he was an associate professor at the time, a gentleman that had also been pioneering RNA-based strategies in self-replicating RNA. And we talk about the data, and I have this sense that could be a seminal event sometime in the future, depending on how things played out, because of the role of the Karolinska with the Nobel. And so come to the fore, and there's all this chatter about a Nobel, and I get advice from a very senior person in Norway, which appoints the committee, and he says, "Robert, you got to get your letter in nominating you." And so I call up this old buddy at the Karolinska, and I say, "Well, tell me what I'm supposed to do. I'm ignorant. What the heck are you supposed to do here? This is totally foreign to me." Because I'm being told that I'm supposed to, tie up with a journalist and hire a lobbying organization and da-da-da-da-da. And he's like, no. That's all noise. And yeah, people do it. He says, we have a really skilled committee that does the due diligence. They're quite good. And they're not influenced by all this stuff, he asserts. And I say, well, could you write the letter? And first he says yes. And then he says, well, I can't really. And he says, I've sat on the committee in the past. So conflict of interest for him. But he says, worry not. He actually started the phone call by saying, Bob Malone, because everybody from back then calls me Bob Malone, all I get is calls from people all over the world, journalists and everybody, about Bob Malone all the time. And I'm like, I'm sorry. And bottom line is, he says, fret not. They know what you did. They know exactly what you did and when you did it. And as far as I'm concerned, you were the first. And I can't predict what they're going to do. But don't worry that they are not aware of your contributions and when. So that's all I ask for. The big prize is something that there's a lot of variables, and frankly, saying the things that I'm saying is paradoxical a little bit because it would make it less likely. But I think that the ethics are such, the stakes are such that I have to park my own self-interest while still being a responsible professional and speak my truth about what I'm observing. And so, but that Brett Weinstein podcast that's gone, you know, I like to say 3 old men sitting around a table talking for 3 hours goes viral. That's weird. Something really weird going on there.
Yeah, but
think,
you know what?
I think we're in a moment in history that is unique. Over.
Yeah, well, I give Brett a lot of credit for being also outspoken and willing to put his YouTube channel, his very successful YouTube channel, on the line. Joe Rogan also had him on after all these censorship issues and did like a emergency.
Brett's been demonetized. I mean, it's cut his family income in half. This is because he spoke about the I word. Right? Yeah. Are we on YouTube or not?
Well, so this is the thing about my show. It's available everywhere. So I go down swinging. I don't censor anything. I don't censor. I'm like, if it gets me kicked off YouTube, it's available everywhere.
Yeah. Else. So in YouTube, you can't use the ivermectin word.
Yeah. Which is
that was why that 3-hour one got deleted. And the prior Pierre Corey one. Now, here's what's fascinating. This is breaking news. You've heard it here first. Andrew Hill has just published his meta-analysis for ivermectin. I haven't even posted it yet because I've nonstop been on podcasts since 7 this morning. But it does show pretty unequivocally using a meta-analysis tool, and there's some new big data that have come in. Ivermectin is effective. It is not 100% effective. It's partially effective, particularly when used early on. But all of this just insane pushback over that repurposed drug, which is paradoxical. Are we going to hear an apology from YouTube? I doubt it. I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. But people's careers have been damaged. Their reputations sullied. They've been fired or smeared over this 40-year-old proven safe drug that the data have. I've been following Andy's data, and he consulted me about when he might wish to reveal it in a publication form, and we both agreed he had to hold his fire until some of these big data studies came in. And now he's decided to put it out. He's been very responsible. There are various people that disparage him, but because he gets funding from Bill Gates, and that's one of the various internet memes that float around is about Evil Bill and his manipulation of the world. There's guilt by association, but the data are now out. And I think the position that ivermectin doesn't have activity against SARS-CoV-2 when administered early in the course of the disease is increasingly untenable. And that's why, by the way, that got deleted. It wasn't because I said spike is cytotoxic. Brett clipped the spike is cytotoxic segment out, and that one's been seen multiple millions of times, and YouTube hasn't taken it down. So for what it's worth, there it is.
Yeah, I mean,
very odd times.
Yeah, but see, because of your history and your inside understanding of what happens behind the scenes with, you know, the patent wars. And I mean, you see it now with the patents, how there's these labs all over the world that are saying we can make the vaccine, let's get them out to people, we can make them cheaper, we can make them faster. And if it was really about getting the vaccine to people, then why wouldn't they let these labs do it at you know, a cheaper cost and help get them out there quicker? They want to hold on to their patents because it's about the money. So it's like somebody like you who've seen behind the curtain and you've seen the way things work. You're probably not surprised by what's going on and how, you know, how this is all developing and all the censorship for specific reasons.
So I've had feedback on these. I can't even count how many podcasts I've done now. And they all go to different audiences, which is why I asked you about what your audience was. And that's my intention, is to not just, you know, do conservative talk radio or whatever. Try to get it out to a broader number of people, since I'm blocked by the mainstream media, right? I am explicitly blocked by the Trusted News Initiative for engaging with mainstream media. So I don't have it. For me, it was a conscious thing. Okay, they're going to block me, deal with it. What's the alternative? Well, we go to new media. And, you know, this swarm of podcasters, you guys are breaking the mold. And good on you. You're the hope for the future for information and freedom of information, frankly. But this is a bizarre, odd time. So that was the decision, was suddenly coming off of the Brett Weinstein podcast going viral, and people, for some reason, wanting to hear my message, we started saying yes. Usually I'm on background, and I've been dealing with the media for decades, almost always on background. The feedback that I get, now I'm finally getting to the point, the feedback that I get from many people is that I come across as calm and reassuring in some way, despite saying these radical things that I say. I think that comes from this been there, done that, got the t-shirt. None of this surprises me. It's the reality of my life working at the interface of private industry and the government for decades, right? And having been through, I don't know how many outbreaks. For me, most of this stuff, the sick, sad thing is that nobody seems to learn. We do the same mistakes again and again and again and again. But there's something very different here that Brett and I were touching on towards the end of that 3 hours, that is this odd emergent phenomena that comes from the fusion of mainstream media, big tech, pharma, and government. And that's taking us into some dark places. You can imagine I rolled out of bed at 6:30 this morning and quickly threw on a white shirt. I had to change my shirt already, and the sport coat, and was online with a group of Germans for 2 hours. They're pretty worked up, and they get it. You know, the German intellectual history totally gets what's going on, and they're pretty worked up about it. And I don't think I need to use the N-word here, if you follow what I'm saying. I'm not talking about African Americans. For your listenership to understand. Yeah.
Some people are really confused about what Germans have to do with the N-word.
The German Socialist Party, right? Of which at the time in the 30s was the leftist party, by the way. The National Socialists, led by Mr. Hitler. So this, George Orwell wrote what he wrote as a warning to the future. And we now live a world of, as you were noting, and the friend that I've never met who blogs as What's Her Face has noted, this is pretty much full-on Ministry of Truth time. and it's hard to discern the outlines of how this happens. I cannot imagine that there was some powwow between the WHO in Donald Trump's office and Tony Fauci and big media. I do know that there were meetings in the White House with Amazon and others early in the outbreak in 2020 that led to a decision for censorship. And I think that was the camel's nose, because the book that my wife wrote and put out as a self-published in the first week in February on Amazon to help people prepare themselves for this novel coronavirus. The name of the virus didn't even exist then. And protect themselves, got deleted from Amazon, and contrary to their policy, they would not disclose to us why or even communicate anything about that. And it immediately followed a set of meetings that happened in the White House around that time that were documented in the Washington Post, which obviously had a front rank seat. So this policy of government management of media and information goes back to the beginning. And I think please understand, I have known Tony Fauci. I've gone toe to toe with Tony Fauci for literally decades. I'm a David. He's a Goliath, but it doesn't stop me from occasionally slinging my rocks in public meetings. And he knows just who I am. So I'm not a fan. But Dr. Fauci has in the Washington Post FOIA emails, it's been revealed that he's quite clear that he was comfortable substituting his personal opinion about what was good for all of us for evidence-based medicine. And I just learned a new term, so I'm going to share it with your listeners. They can look it up. It's called the Noble Platonic Lie. Platonic like Plato. Noble being the belief that it's in the best interest to lie. And if you look that up, what you see is the logic behind it, which goes back to Plato, is that elites are justified in communicating mistruths that they believe are in the public good. So that's what underpins a lot of this, is this belief that it's okay to, the euphemism is misrepresent information, but there's a three-letter word that we all use. It's called lying. And I think it's the right word. And there's a belief in the Noble Platonic Lie, and that belief extends through the NIAID leadership and to the WHO leadership, in my opinion. The belief that it's okay to say mistruths for the greater good. And one of those things is the belief that we cannot allow full disclosure of risks and adverse events associated with these vaccine products, because it will dissuade people from taking vaccine, and that will result in more deaths. That's the logic trail. And if you pick that apart, what it's saying is at a fundamental level, we value the rights of the collective greater than the rights of the individual. Now, here's my argument, if you'll allow me to continue this thread, because I think this is important. Now, I'm going to bridge to the bioethics. Okay. We have something codified in federal law called the common rule. And it's derived from a series of things that go back to World War II, starting with the Nuremberg Trials, the Nuremberg Code, the Helsinki Accords, the Belmont Report, and then there's this federal law called the Common Rule, and it relates to medical research. By definition, they don't like, this is one of the things I probably get censored for, but I'm a regulatory specialist. Okay, for me, these are just objective facts. They're not political issues, they're just the way things are. And I remember when the emergency use authorization, I know the people that wrote it, okay? the statutes and the FDA policy around it, okay, deal with them. on a routine basis. So products made available for use under emergency use authorization remain experimental. They are experimental medical products by definition. It's a waiver of certain requirements having to do with signed informed consent. That's the genesis of this. Now it's been stretched, and it's like Play-Doh, you know, they've distorted it over time a little bit, but that's how it started. But there is no disputing at a fundamental level that these remain experimental medical products at this point in time, these vaccines, these genetic vaccines that are licensed in the United States. Therefore, it's true. It's not a conspiracy theory. We are all involved in the largest medical experiment ever in the history of the world. That's the truth. And it's a global experiment. At a minimum, there are bioethics which guide this. Those bioethics at their fundamental foundation have three key components, and there's a little axiom off the side. Okay, so I'm going to quickly hit those. First one is there has to be full disclosure of risk. That means granular disclosure, like when you buy a box of medicine and you pull out that little piece of paper with all the tiny writing, okay, and it's got this list of things that could happen, and it starts from the average thing, like, oh, you might get a fever or a headache or something like that, or have problems peeing, or you might get diarrhea. And it goes all the way down to you read those things and you say, holy moly, this is going to kill me. But they're very rare events down at the bottom, okay? But they may or may not be directly associated. They are associated in time with administration of the drug. The causal relationship isn't often established. That's the level of granularity that has to be disclosed for medical research products and for people to engage, participate as volunteers in medical research. Underscore word volunteers. Second point, those risks have to be comprehended. So that means we can't hide them using fancy medical talk like thrombocytopenia or menometrorrhagia or cerebral venous thrombosis or coagulopathy. Okay, we gotta use common language like an 8th grader can understand. Those are the rules. And you, as the person participating, have to kind of grok it. You have to get it, understand what those things mean. Okay, so common language. Point number 3, there has to be full voluntary choice, personal choice to participate in the medical research. This is federal law. And there cannot be what's called coercion or enticement. What's that mean? Well, in the current situation, if everybody from the president on down is saying you have to take this vaccine, that's called coercion. Enticement is we're going to give out free, fill in the blank, ice cream cones, lottery cards, shotguns, whatever, to get you to take the jab. Okay, that's called enticement. For experimental products, that's all disallowed. And yet we have run right through those guardrails. Now, we justify it because we believe the rights of the collective, of the community, to be free of the threat of this virus outweigh the rights of the individual. I'm going to reel you back and I'm going to say some words, and no, I'm not saying that anybody in the public health service is a Nazi. But I'm going to talk about what happened in the Nuremberg Trials. The logic there that justified what was done, subjecting prisoners and other conscripted individuals that were considered to be not mainstream parts of society, including certain ethnic groups, including the Jews, were basically conscripted, compelled to engage in medical research having to do with cold tolerance and things that could enable improved cold tolerance, so that the German troops who were just not tolerating the Moscow campaign and the campaigns in Finland would learn, the German army would be able to develop technology that would protect them. So the interests of this German state outweighed the interests of those individuals, and that was the justification. Now, we all met at a place called Nuremberg. We collectively, the West, And we had a long series of trials. And at the end of that, we decided this was such an egregious offense that we're going to hang all these guys, all these MDs that did this. Okay, that was what happened. I'm not saying that I'm not with Dell in saying that everybody on the ACIP needs to be outed akin to the Nuremberg Trials. That was a little over the top. But I'm not saying that, but it's instructive to remember that all of this comes out of a deep dive that the West did about the rights of the individual versus the rights of the collective as it relates to medical research. And we all clearly decided, no, that's not okay. And what was true then is true now. Now, there is actually I've learned there's a new body of thought about this that is seeking to build a justification that it's okay to impose things like this on individuals in the interests of society. And that is a serious intellectual scholarly pursuit right now, is to build that logic. Personally, I don't want to be there. I'm heading to Portugal. I'm out of here. I'll go breed horses and sit on the beach. I do not want to be subjected to a world in which I can be compelled to do things to my body that I don't want to do. I'm kind of dug in on personal rights on that front and liberty. And I think the majority of the American population is also. So there it is. Now we've gone from the minutia of my origin story to this deep issue, intellectual issue of human rights and the rights of the individual versus the rights of society. But if you pick apart the arguments that are being preferred that justify the censorship, justify the actions, justify all this messaging, which is telling people two things. Number one, if you think you're experiencing side effects, you're crazy, because these vaccines have no side effects. That's a whole discussion about what that feels like if you're somebody who is experiencing an adverse event. And that it's justified to censor any information or discussion that's perceived as disclosing potential risks which could lead to vaccine uptake hesitancy. That's the justification for the censorship right now, is we don't want people to have access to full disclosure of risks. So we're violating two of the three, at a minimum, two of the three central tenets of the common rule that reaches back all the way to the Nuremberg Trials. And we're okay with that because we believe the benefit to the common good exceeds the risk to the individual.
Yeah, and that's so
mic drop.
Yeah, it's so dangerous, and to keep with the Nazi theme. I mean, Joseph Goebbels and the understanding of propaganda, and I mean, if you just learn about Edward Bernays and really understanding how to motivate and control the masses, you see things with like how they keep regurgitating, if you get the vaccine, if you get the jab, you don't have to wear a mask. And people just keep repeating that. And often when people say that, I'm like, well, you do realize that logically that doesn't make any sense, because even the pharmaceutical companies don't claim to stop you from getting it or stop you from spreading it.
It's worse than that. Okay. Yeah, we get all this messaging. This is the other problem. And this is what's leading to this profound disillusion with public health. And like I said, it goes back to the Noble Lie. So we now have the WHO clearly and explicitly stating the vaccines will not protect you fully from infection. And now that we have the new variants, you have to go back to wearing masks. This is WHO policy, okay? So that there's a bunch of underlying logic in the messaging that we've been given, that if you allow yourself to red pill, sorry, I said it, like I said the other word earlier, if you allow yourself to open your mind just a little bit and say, something here doesn't feel right, which is, I think a lot of people are kind of uneasy with this, but they don't know how a structure to give voice to their uneasiness. But if you allow yourself to open up and say, what's going on here, and start to pick apart the underlying logic. And unfortunately, a lot of people aren't really trained and powered to do that. And maybe this is one of the other things that I'm helping with, is to say, okay, let's recognize the underlying logic here and just be clear about it. And you make your own decisions, it's your body, but let's be clear about what's going on here. I cited Buffalo Springfield, right? In my bioethics paper. It's time to stop children and look at what's going down. We're at one of those kind of Vietnam War moments, I think. And particularly on the topic of young adults being forced to be vaccinated in order to go back to college. That's aggravating two key constituencies in the United States: suburban moms and young adults, for good reason. But if you pick this apart, what you find is a lot of the assertions are flawed. Like, we have to get to 70% vaccine uptake so that we can release the hold on everybody and we reach herd immunity. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it. That's a lie. How do I know it's a lie? Because I know how to calculate herd immunity and what's required for herd immunity. And I know that we don't have the data from our clinical trials to allow us to calculate the vaccine uptake requirements to reach herd immunity. Because the vaccine trial primary endpoints have been disease and death, largely. They haven't been, here's the phrase, another scientific word, transmissibility. So transmissibility is a measure of, if I'm infected, what's the probability that I infect you, okay, or my family member, or my close work contact. Okay, that's transmissibility. And these vaccines, almost universally, we do not have robust data on transmissibility for each of them. So therefore, we can't calculate what the uptake requirements are for herd immunity. And the 90% figure you're giving for efficacy is efficacy in protecting you from disease and death. Now, the truth is, remember, I've had COVID, I've had long COVID, I didn't die. The only drug I had available at the time was the one I discovered during the course of my infection, which was Pepcid, right? Much slandered. And by the way, there's new data out about how famotidine, the chemical name for Pepcid, works in the context of COVID, in addition to the theories that I've published and my team has published. But, you know, it's easy to say, oh, these guys are crazy, as BARDA did, that they're talking about using a stomach acid drug for treating SARS-CoV-2 COVID, but in fact, it's based on solid science and mechanism of action having to do with histamine H2 blocking. Put that aside. We've suppressed all of this information and forced people into kind of like a cattle chute. You have to do this for the good of the country, because in the good of your neighbors. So let me pick apart that logic just a little bit. What it comes down to is the logic there also, in addition to the herd immunity part, is that the risk of developing severe disease or death is calculated by the CDC and maintained as a running total in the United States since the beginning of the outbreak. Just to illustrate, for ages 0 to 18, there has been a total of, last I checked, 386 deaths in total from COVID, 386 from the start of the outbreak, in children through 18 years. And 18 up to 29 or something like that is a couple thousand. The deaths are all in a very small population, by the way. Demographically, if you look at the distribution of the population, it's kind of skewed towards the young, because the old people die off, like me, right? It's just the way things are. We're all mortal. So we're weighted towards the younger cohort. All the death is pretty much all loaded in certainly over 60, over 65, and it just goes exponential the older you get. Now, it's also in the obese in some special populations, but for the most part, and here it comes, hashtag boomer disease. I think your population, your readership gets hashtags. So that's what it is. This is killing boomers. It's not killing young adults. It's not killing children. And the logic is that we need to vaccinate everybody with the associated risk in order to protect the boomers. Now, to my way of thinking, we vaccinate the boomers. We vaccinate the people that are at high risk. And if they don't want to take vaccine, God bless them. They're accepting their own risk. It's not my job to make the decision about whether or not we save Uncle Joe. It's Uncle Joe's decision about whether or not he wants to accept vaccine with whatever small risks exist for Uncle Joe. It's his choice. It's his body. You know, maybe he has autoimmune disease and doesn't want to take it. Whatever the story is. Maybe he just doesn't like the idea of genetic therapy. That's his business. But it doesn't mean that we need to vaccinate children and young adults to protect Uncle Joe, because their risk is tiny. And the thing is that this runs contrary to the logic of every vaccine I've ever seen rolled out, where they always make a risk-benefit evaluation as a function of the key demographic groups, which are elderly, healthy, normal adult, adolescent, children, infants, pregnant women, and special populations, including immunosuppressed. We always evaluate each of those separate groups. And we do a formal risk-benefit analysis that uses the tools that the insurance company uses, for better or for worse, for their actuarial tables called quality-adjusted life year calculations. And one of the things about QALYs, the acronym, when you do formal risk-benefit evaluation, is it's skewed in favor of the young, because pick apart the words quality-adjusted life years. So what they're saying is if it causes death, the death of a child, which has a potential future lifespan of over 60 years, that's losing 60 years of life. The death of an 80-year-old who might live for another 5 on average, if he's lucky, causes the loss of 5 years of life, of productive life. So you can appreciate, if you go through those kinds of calculations, which the insurance company, bless their hearts, uses to determine compensation for death and stuff like that. Okay, you know, when you're old and you die, well, you're worthless. It's just the way things work in the insurance industry. It's not pretty, but it is. But if a young person dies or is disabled, that's compromising a lot of years of productive life. So this is quality-adjusted life year calculations. And if they were to run QALYs, as they always do in the past, for each of these special cohorts, I guarantee that, and most physicians that are at all objective, and I haven't drunk the Kool-Aid, will agree, you don't vaccinate the kids. It just doesn't make any sense. And we can arm wrestle, but to my point of view, you don't vaccinate the young adults either. You vaccinate the people that are at risk of death and disease at a fairly high frequency. And I think that the logic was underpinned. There's some other little weird clauses in federal law that basically say that you don't have to get informed consent if the risk of the agent under EUA is, I forget what the word is, but it basically, if it's considered to be a modest or largely inconsequential risk of adverse events with a new medical product under EUA, you don't have to get informed consent. So skeptics might say that the government has been dug in on asserting that there are no risk factors with vaccine, because if there were risk factors, then the logic of what they're doing completely falls apart. But irrespective, this is another, I've given you 3 or 4 of these things that when you pick them apart, the messaging coming from the World Health Community and the government and the public health officials, it doesn't withstand logical examination. And I'm trying to help you and your viewership and the world community understand what's going on, what's coming down. And my position is I don't want to dissuade people from taking vaccines, right? I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've spent 30 years in vaccines. This is fundamentally my technology. If anything, I'm biased towards it. My personal opinion is that they got fast and loose and sloppy and went too fast at the start, and they didn't challenge their own thinking in terms of using intact spike or slightly modified spike, which is biologically active. And almost daily, we find out more about the problems and risks in the biology of spike. I think it was just, folks making the dumb, easy choice and not challenging each other about the potential consequences. But, in the heat of battle, this happens. So I'm not saying they're bad people and they should, be tried. Some people are, but it happened. I think that people deserve to know and make their own decisions. I think they deserve to have options like more traditional vaccines that aren't genetic vaccines. I think we are required by law to fully disclose those risks at this point in time, and really after licensure too. And that by law, all of us, we're not owned by the state here in the West at the moment. And we probably ought to recognize that that's a freedom that we could actually lose. And it's probably worth talking up and saying, hey, nope, this isn't okay. If just for the basic principle. Now, whether or not you or your readership want to take vaccine is a personal choice, in my opinion. It's not something that the state can mandate. Or if so, we're in a different world, a parallel reality from the one that I was brought up in. So that's how I see the fundamental issues. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, the thing is that's really interesting is that everybody's getting their information about the vaccine from everybody but the pharmaceutical companies, because like you said, it's being pushed by the politicians, celebrities, content creators, musicians, everybody's, you're seeing these commercials where it's like, get the vaccine so we can get things back to normal. And like, it boggles my mind that like nobody's putting two and two together and figuring out like, wait, how does this even make any sense? Like, I'm getting the vaccine to protect older people, but it doesn't stop me from getting it or spreading it. So how does that make any sense? Oh, the mask supposedly is for protection of other people, so I don't spread to other people, but the vaccine doesn't stop me from spreading it. So I don't get how the mask is even in relations with getting the vaccine. Like, it just, like you said, so much of it makes no logical sense. And a term that you use in other interviews, like Ryan from Last American Vagabond and Del Bigtree, like this groupthink and how dangerous that is. And really Nazi Germany, I know it's kind of like a theme people maybe overuse sometimes, but it's such a recent example because it wasn't that long ago of how people can just go with the herd and not even question what they're doing, or and they can be true believers. They truly believe they're doing something wrong for the right of the world. And that thinking is so dangerous. It's so hard to get people to snap out of that. And also, like, the US did such a great job of right before the election making everything political. I'm like you, I'm a political atheist. I'm also not religious, so I have no horse in the race. And to me, I just like looking at information and exploring ideas and getting different perspectives. I've had people on like Roger Stone. I've had people on like Jesse Ventura and Greg Palast, and who's left leaning. So it's to me, it's like I just like having people on who are willing to have open conversations. But it was impossible to talk about these things, and it still kind of is. But it after the tensions of the election, they did a great job of the divide and conquer technique of getting all of us to fight about everything. Even the ivermectin thing, I think it was the No Agenda podcast or somebody said how the best part of ivermectin was that Trump never brought it up, because everything became political, right? Like, that was the best thing that ivermectin had going for himself, because he didn't bring it up, so it wasn't politically charged to talk about it. And that's the thing about Dr. Fauci. I had Dr. Joel Hirschhorn, who wrote a whole book about like all these doctors that were having success with ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and vitamin D and C and zinc and all this stuff, and all these doctors were being suppressed. All these people were being suppressed. And Dr. Fauci's the highest paid government official. I mean, he has huge influence over the whole community, medical community, and for people to think that, and what boggles my mind is, prior to 2020, it's like I almost feel like the majority of people would come to terms that, like, we would all agree the government usually has other interests and besides ours, and corporations only care about the bottom line. Usually it's not about the greater good, and all of a sudden we're trusting big pharma, who have been gotten in trouble many of times for false advertisement, or even the whole FDA.
The track record of Pfizer is not good.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So
and
for people listening who basically just like, okay, what's your opinion on the mRNA vaccine? do you think when you look at the risk reward ratio, does it make any sense even for the older population?
So currently they're at high enough risk, and to your audience, a fundamental precept in drug and vaccine development is that everything has toxicity. Okay, so anybody who says the vaccine has no toxicity, well, you can say right away, that's propaganda. So everything has some degree of risk. This is the truth. And the question is, does the risk outweigh the benefit, or the benefits outweigh the risk? If you're in the older cohorts, the event rate, well, let me illustrate this way. We all get in our cars and we all get in an airplane. We all know that people die in cars and people die in airplanes. But we're mature enough as individuals to know that the probability of that happening for us at any one time is minuscule. So what we're asking is the probability of a major adverse event, like a blood clotting problem that could kill you in your brain, something like that, or your heart being damaged, are those risks sufficiently high that for disease or death, that they outweigh the risks of disease or death from the virus? And that, in my mind, is a personal choice. I think that the case is pretty strong if you're in this kind of 60, 65 and older cohort. That's pretty compelling. If you're a infant, child, or adolescent, the data, especially now that the CDC has formally endorsed the cardiomyopathy, and personally, I think it's a lot more prevalent. I think that we could go into the nuance of how these databases came to pass and what's wrong with them, but it's hard to make the case that the risk-benefit ratio favors vaccination of children, infants, adolescents, and young adults. In between, there's a lot of gray zone, and it has a lot to do with what your risk factors are. Are you really obese? In the work that we've done with my colleagues in Beloit in Wisconsin, and I look at the CTs of the patients that we've treated with and without our drug combination, every single one of them has just got this enormous layer of fat. I don't think I'm disclosing anybody's personal medical information there, but they're obese, and obesity is a major risk factor. Now, as I look at you, I got to say, obese, not so much. Me, a little bit. I'm technically obese. I'll own that. I try to keep my diet under control, but I'm an old man, and this happens as we get older. But particularly in America. But if you're in that in-between range, I think you have to make an assessment, advised by your physician if you have that option, about whether this makes sense for you or not. And the only way that you can do that is you have the information. Or you can just go with the flow and say, heck, they all want me to get vaccinated, and so I'm going to get vaccinated. The slang for that on the internet is sheeple. Sorry. But, you know, it's your choice. That's my point. But in that in-between range of, you know, 20-something through 60, I think you have to think about what your job is, what your exposure risk is, what your background medical conditions are, and make an informed decision. But I don't think the state has the right to tell you that you have to get vaccinated. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
And the other thing about this is the risk profile is evolving. We're learning more about the risks. I can tell you there are many more risks out there that aren't officially endorsed yet. For instance, reactivation of viruses leading to things like shingles. For women, the reproductive health issues around menstruation, potentially around spontaneous abortion, look to me like there's some signal there. It's not verified yet. There's a large clinical trial ongoing right now. So the risk in pregnancy, if that was my daughter, I would say, do not take this vaccine during your first and second trimester, please, if you're going to take it, or get vaccinated before you get pregnant, if that's an option. Third trimester looks pretty clear that you're not going to cause spontaneous abortion. Do these vaccines yield autoimmune disease? One of the leading hypotheses for the blood clotting problem, that's the fancy thrombocytopenia and coagulopathy words. One of the leading hypotheses is autoimmune disease involving antiplatelet antibodies. That's the kind of thing that manifests over time. We haven't had a whole lot of time. So we don't really know how frequent that is. So the risks are going to evolve. The probability, to my eye, is that the risk part of this balance, you know, if we've got this scale here and we're making a decision, the risk, we've learned some more risks. Over time, they're likely to be more and more. Simultaneously, the risk of severe disease and death seems to be dropping. Is it dropping just in people who become infected? Okay. We're learning more about how to treat it. We're getting drugs, anticoagulants, among other things. And I got to tell you, as a virologist and vaccinologist, we all know that when a virus crosses into a new species, it's historically much more pathogenic, and then here's another fancy scientific word, it attenuates over time with subsequent serial passage. What that means is it evolves. It evolves in the host of the new species. And the determinants, I spoke about this on a recent podcast with Alison Morrow, as I recall, with somebody, I don't remember. But the short version is that the evolutionary drivers, and viruses are amazing evolutionary pressure cookers because they produce so much offspring. The evolutionary pressures in general for viruses, once they cross into a new host, is to become less pathogenic and more infectious. And what does it look like we've got with Delta variant? I don't know. The data look to me like it's less pathogenic and more infectious. Now, if you were of that ilk that uses the term natural immunity, I personally don't like that term. It sounds like innate immunity too much, but it's the term people are using. What do they mean by natural immunity? It means I've been infected, and that confers protection from subsequent infection. So that's the way the term natural immunity is being used. And to my eye, the probability is high, and I think a lot of other virologists that think about these things, that aren't like drinking the Kool-Aid and have, are invested in the status quo. Free-thinking virologists, in many cases, will tell you, especially in the Netherlands, and veterinary virologists, will tell you that this is the normal progression of virus evolution once it crosses into a new host, is that it tends to become less pathogenic and more infectious. Because if you think about it, it's not in the interest of the virus from an evolutionary standpoint to have the host go to bed and be sick or die. It's in the evolutionary interest of the virus for the host to continue walking around and spreading virus and infecting other people. And there is a natural selection that tends to lead to that endpoint over time. And I hypothesize that we are starting to see that with these new variants, that there isn't an intrinsic evolutionary driver to increase pathogenicity. Quite the opposite. And so over time, I think what we will see, regardless of vaccine uptake, is evolutionary selection for less pathogenic, more highly infectious virus that will spread deeper and deeper into the population through natural infection, confer immunity, and eventually we'll get back to something that circulates in mostly at a low level in young adult populations that have not been previously exposed to the virus. And this is why you see pediatric infectious disease in the way you do, and the way viruses tend to circle the globe in waves, is a virus will penetrate through a population. Everybody will more or less, you'll reach herd immunity through a natural infection pathway. And then the virus will stop circulating in that population, let's say Brazil. And then over time, you'll have new birth cohorts that haven't been exposed to virus. And they'll get to a large enough group that, somebody goes to some other country and comes back, through the silver virus transmission tube called an airline, and brings that thing into the population. And we've got a sufficiently large group of young people that have been born not previously exposed, and then it takes off. If you understand that, God bless you, because that is a concept in epidemiology and virology that very few people get. But that's why you see these pediatric outbreaks, is because they're the susceptible populations. And that's just how virology works. I mean, people are, Brett loves to think that he can eradicate SARS-CoV-2, and I hope he's right. I'm a cynic and a virologist and a vaccinologist. I say it ain't going to happen, my friend. No matter if ivermectin was even as good as you say it is, and it's not going to happen because of these underlying dynamics. The viruses find little niches that they hide out in, and then they come back. And we're going to live with this virus in some form for the rest of our natural lives, in my opinion. And so all this jibber jabber, that we can beat the virus and eradicate it and all that, that's crazy talk from a strict virology, epidemiology, vaccinology standpoint.
But living with viruses, I mean, that's just what we've done since the beginning of time. I mean, it's sounds
the nature
scary.
of being.
Yeah, it sounds scary. I talk to friends of mine. I'm like, remember when, like, we used to get sick and call out of work, and if you weren't bedridden, your boss would get mad at you because it's like, what do you mean you were out and about? Like, if you call out, you got to be in bed, like you're incapable of working. So what does that mean? That means that if you had a runny nose, if you had a cough, if you had some mild symptoms, you're going to work and you're spreading viruses, and you're going to work and that's how, like I always say, your immune system
True.
is much like your muscles. Like, you have to work it out from time to time to keep them strong.
Okay, that is a documented truth, what you just said. Honest to God, there's some fantastic studies out of Australia with kids. And basically, they show, tiger moms, they show that kids that are allowed to play in the mud are healthier, is the basic bottom line. Getting exposed to natural environmental antigens teaches our immune system in really positive ways. And if you don't do it as a kid, you're a setup for allergy and all kinds of stuff as an adult. And it's just so go hang out on a horse farm and shovel the shit. I'm sorry. It's good for you.
So my full-time job is we have a little family construction company. And I would say this all the time, like, if germs are so dangerous, construction workers would be dying left and right, because we'll be at a job site And if we, if there's nowhere to wash your hands, do you think the guys aren't going to eat their lunch? They're eating their lunch. I mean, they're just going to eat their lunch. We share tools.
Amen.
We're sweating. I mean, my dad, and it was a natural transition for my father because he grew up as a farmer, so working with his hands and being
Yep.
outside. That's why he's like construction. If I come to America, construction seems like a easy transition. And these guys are healthy as horses. I mean, these guys work all day. They barely clean their hands, and it's not like in a dirty way, but it's just like you're busy, so you don't have time to go wash your hands and sanitize your hands every 2 seconds.
Amen. Ricky, you may not know that I was a carpenter and a farmhand before I was a physician and a scientist. So that's another part of my history. And you can actually go on my LinkedIn profile and find a construction project that I worked on as a young man.
Awesome.
It's called the Whale House in Santa Barbara. That got a lot of attention. So I'm with you. However, I will say I cut a lot of cedar shingles, and I'm still allergic to cedar dust.
It's hard work, but there's something rewarding about doing stuff with your hands and being outside, being
so healthy for your soul.
Yeah, I mean, the blue zones, right? When they were like looking at people who live the longest, and in a lot of cases, it's people who live these type of lifestyles. I'm convinced that our bodies and minds, us as humans, we have adapted to that physical part of living. The doing things with your hands, the sweating. I mean, it's like a classic car, right? It's like this car was engineered and designed to move. So if you store it, you would assume like, oh, things will last long because I'm not wearing it out. Well, it actually the opposite.
It all goes to hell.
Yeah, it all goes to hell. Exactly. Your body's the same way. That it's like that saying, sitting's the new smoking. You sit down and you feel more tired or more lazy than when you're moving and you're being active, because your body for thousands
and what is the COVID killer? It's obesity.
You're absolutely right. I mean, a body in motion stays in motion. Your body. I mean, that's the other thing I keep telling people. I'm like, it's called fat storage because you're storing it when you need it. I'm like, if you're not doing anything, maybe you shouldn't be eating. Maybe you should. And this goes. I mean, you want to talk about nutritional science? I mean, that's just. I mean, that goes out the window. The way they've lied to us about what to eat. When I was growing up, the food pyramid was all grains and stuff that had no nutritional value, and we're just gonna, basically turn you into a obese person. I mean, it's madness. So this idea that like, just trust us.
Yeah, that's by the way, that's another classic example of regulatory capture, is the USDA and the recommended food intake is absolutely a case study in regulatory capture. Notice that USDA for years now, multiple administrations, has been run by people with close ties to Monsanto. Just saying.
Yeah.
So when somebody asks me what is regulatory capture, I don't start talking about the FDA first. I talk about the USDA, because that one is so in your face that you can't avoid it. But we've gone beyond that regulatory capture now into this odd integration that is a horizontal integration, for those that are economists, across these multiple industrial platforms, and that being big tech, big media, pharma, and government. And now, because of government's role in funding academia, this is why we end up with the academics that are the self-appointed thought police defending the official policy position of the government, is because that's where they get their bread and butter. They have to toe the party line with Tony, or they, or the nipple runs dry. Sorry, that's just the way things are now. It's all integrated, and I think that's what we're facing is the concept. When Brett talks about these emergent phenomena, it doesn't have to be that a bunch of high flyers met in Davos and decided how to rule the world. Maybe they did. I don't know. I'm not there. They don't invite me to those meetings. But I can't say they don't. But we don't have to go there. The easier explanation is what I see is pretty much incompetence. It's not collusion. There is some collusion, but there's a lot of incompetence. And I think we can explain it as the consequence. What we're seeing is the consequences of a series of decisions that we've made over time about how we're going to allow the world to organize itself, and the financial incentives for horizontal integration across industries.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, my biggest issue with all this is just let everybody get all the information and decide for themselves. That's why the censorship issue is so important, because like you said, is there risks, is there not risks? Let people decide, but you can't decide when you're force feeding them one narrative. You're only letting them see one aspect of the argument. And the way I look at it, it's like, our opinions, our perspectives, our decision making is based on information. Well, if you control the information, you control the people, and that's exactly what's going on.
And like I said, I'm sorry, I'm going to go there again. Mr. George Orwell wrote to us out of the past into the future in a book called 1984, and he says, basically, pay attention because this is how it happens. And the control of the words, the language that we're allowed to use, and the thoughts we're allowed to think and talk about is at the center of newspeak. And controlling the language and the words that we use is newspeak. And these days we use terms like politically correct language or things like that, but Orwell had a term for it. And that rewriting of history and use of newspeak and all of that was the responsibility of the Ministry of Truth. And that's why I light up when I learned about the Trusted News Initiative. It is the Ministry of Truth come alive on a global basis. I don't think that's crazy talk. And just for your readership, if you want to understand about the Trusted News Initiative, all you got to do is Google, I'm not kidding, British Broadcasting Corporation, or BBC, Trusted News Initiative, and COVID. And you will pop a press release from the BBC last fall in which they proudly tout that because of their new leadership, they've decided to lead the Trusted News Initiative Consortium to the job of filtering anything having to do with these vaccines that is not allowed, that is not aligned with the official pronouncements of the World Health Organization or national health authorities. So you're literally not allowed to think or talk about stuff that's different from what the bureaucrats are putting out. Those are the new rules. Call it what it is.
Yeah, well, it's like that Facebook whistleblower that Project Veritas talked to about the vaccine hesitant score. People who were questioning vaccines would get this score, and if your score got to a certain number, then they start censoring you or banning you. There was a vaccine adverse reaction group on Facebook. It had like 250,000 people that were basically just sharing their experiences with the vaccine people who had adverse reactions, and completely just deleted from Facebook. And like, why isn't that?
Which I call that the ultimate gaslighting. These people have called me in tears, and just to underscore it, and I've had podcasters end up in tears themselves as they kind of intellectually process what this means. If you imagine yourself as somebody who believes, whether or not it's true, that you've had a vaccine-related adverse event and it's compromised your health, and you go and you are constantly subjected to information that says this can't possibly be true because the vaccines are safe, and yet you know what you experienced. Okay, you start telling yourself internally, I'm crazy. I have to be crazy because I trust these authorities to be speaking truth. And then you get on an online group and you run into other people that say, no, you're not crazy. And they get deleted. So now you're isolated. You have these experiences. You're surrounded by friends, relatives, family, news, media, everything telling you you're crazy. Okay. This is the definition of gaslighting. This is it. This is gaslighting on a profound basis. And if you're this person, one of these people, you're already upset and depressed. And now you have this major social reinforcement. You're not only depressed, you're crazy. Some of these people commit suicide. So just let that sink into your brain a little bit for your listeners.
And that's the thing.
That is the consequence of what we're doing here.
Yeah, and the scary thing is that the government or big tech, everybody's always telling you, "Oh, we're protecting you from misinformation, disinformation. We're protecting." And guess what? That's what communist China tells their people. That's what dictatorships throughout history have told their people. We're doing it to protect you. It's for the betterment of society. It's for all of us. We're not evil people trying to do evil things. We're not doing anything for any other not so moral reasons. We're just protecting you, and people are falling for it. I mean, it's that boiling frog idea of, like, you slowly start boiling the water. Next thing you know, you're in boiling water. You didn't even realize, and that's kind of what's happening. We're sacrificing freedoms and liberties for security. I mean, I've never been a super patriotic person, and during 2020, just seeing so many people that were motivated by their libertarian philosophies and being patriotic, and how they, a lot of people who believe that these fundamental principles of the United States of freedom and liberty, and I just went to Hampton Beach last week, and I mean, their motto is "Live free or die." I mean, that's like a motto you only find in America. People were really passionate about those things, and so I found myself being like, yeah, like these things are important. It's like this. Yeah.
Okay. Can I tell you a story on that? Riff off of that. So one of the first podcasts I did was with a gentleman named Philip McMillan in London. He's a physician. And we finished the podcast, and he says, so we click off record and we keep talking. And he says, "Robert, I got to tell you, when Trump was in office, anything that any of those people said was bad, in my opinion, because that's his orientation. And now that Trump is out of office, I've been listening to them, and they make more and more and more sense to me. Somehow not having this oppositional defiant thing with Trump is for that gentleman, a physician, he's coming to terms with exactly what you've just expressed. And he's found that he's seeing the compelling logic in a more libertarian perspective, which I'm not a libertarian. I mean, I know the face of libertarianism too. I mean, the face of libertarianism is in Tennessee. I used to live in North Georgia. I saw that, okay? Face of libertarianism is, if you don't pay the volunteer fire department this year and your house burns down, suck it up, snowflake, because that's the way it is, right? You didn't pay, and now you get the consequences. Okay, I'm not okay living in that society. So there's full throat libertarianism, but you could choose to live in Tennessee if you want to do that and not pay taxes. Personally, I'd rather have fire department and pay some taxes and other things too. That's just how I'm wired, and I think that Virginia is kind of a happy medium between Tennessee and New Jersey, to be blunt. But other people think otherwise. And that's the lovely thing about our federal system, is we have this diversity in states. But what you just voiced is being voiced all over the place, including all over Europe. And one other anecdote I'd like to share. So I'm told that no one is ever on Glenn Beck really 2 times, only very rarely, let alone 3 times. So I've been on Glenn Beck 3 times. Yay. Who would have thought it? I spent an hour and a half with this gentleman over 3 days, which politically, he lives in a different universe from me. And at the end of it, Glenn Beck says to me, "I really enjoyed these conversations. And what I really liked about it was you kept politics out of this completely." For Glenn Beck to say that, I thought was a little bit mind-bending. So what I'm seeing is that these issues that we're talking about are orthogonal to the classic left-right axis. And they are issues that are allowing people from a broad political spectrum to have discussions about shared values. And if there's a silver lining here, I think that's one of them. It's kind of a little bit of a wake-up call, and do we want to live in a society where the world is controlled by the big money and that meets in Davos every year or two? Is that the world we want to live in? And there is a logic that's been put out by various journalists that opine in the New York Times, for example, that that we need to learn from China. And we need to become more like China if we're going to compete globally. And that there's a lot of upside to the Chinese more authoritarian, centralized economy, hybrid capitalism model. And look how great they're doing. They're dominating the world. So we need to be more like them. And that is a logic that's out there. And we're seeing the face of that implemented, I believe, in the West. And I think we need to kind of recognize it when we see it and say, here's an embodiment of this. Is this really what we want? Or are we willing to take, I lived in Switzerland for a while. Switzerland is an interesting place. Lived in Bern.
I was almost born in Switzerland.
Right across
My parents worked there for
a long
time.
Yeah. So Americans don't realize that the Swiss system is like the fantasy of the don't tread on me people. It is the cantons rule the show pretty much. And that's akin to the states. The federalized part of Switzerland, located in Bern, isn't in session all the time. The cantons have a lot of power. And by the way, when you go to buy a comb, plastic comb your hair, in a Swiss store, there's a good chance it's made in Switzerland, not in China. You have to pay more for it. A lot of times the quality's a little better. We all bitch about Chinese quality, but you get what you pay for. And if you want to live in that kind of a society that is, fully free, and by the way, I use Proton Mail, not Gmail anymore, out of Switzerland, because I'm tired of the censorship and Google looking over my shoulder. There's a prototype there. And, it comes at a cost. We don't have all the same goodies because we're getting all this cheap junk from China. And we all know if we go to Harbor Freight and buy a hammer there, it's not going to last the same, but maybe that's good enough. We're talking about construction. But personally, I really like my Kubota tractor made in Japan, and it doesn't break down. Yay. I'm willing to pay extra for it. And if there was an analog, I drive a GMC Dually 3500, 2000. It's an LBZ, so it's the good one. And I have to rebuild it from time to time, but that's my choice. We can live in that world. We don't have to live in a Chinese model. We may not have the same standard of living, but I suggest to your readership or your viewership that maybe the price is worth it, and that we might want to think about what's being done. There's all this jingoism about Made in America, but there's merit to that. But you're not gonna have so many goodies. You want to trade goodies for freedom? For me, I live on a horse farm, and I live a middle class life, and I breed Lusitanos, and I consult, and I try to help people, but I'm not a millionaire.
Yeah, but you're rich with happiness and love and the things that are important in life. I mean, we've been so. I mean, this goes back to just I mean Edward Bernays and really using those techniques in marketing and getting us to buy stuff we don't need. And thinking that that's the root of happiness, that we buy all these material things. You have to have that newer
Bingo.
car. Yeah, you have to have all, you're constantly keeping up with the guy next door who has more stuff. It's like, instead of we really should instill start spending more time appreciating the things you do have and stop complaining about the things you don't have. And
And each other. That's
yeah,
what brings happiness.
community.
Is this what we're doing right here? We're talking, we're sharing ideas, and that I think, and I spent July 4th with the son and daughter-in-law and the two grandkids.
What's better than that? I mean, nothing's better than that.
Yeah.
It's I mean, that's why when we started off, and I don't know if it was right in the beginning when we started the show or not, but when you talked about like who'd want to listen to three old guys talking, it's funny because it reminds me of this story of, so when I was a kid, my dad had the wine cellar right underneath my bedroom. And everybody, all the Portuguese guys in the neighborhood would make wine, and then they would all go in little groups to each other's houses and hang out in the wine cellar, eat some chouriça, presunto, and have some wine. And I'd be upstairs in my room, and I could hear them all night sitting down there talking and laughing. And I'm like, what are these guys doing down there, just in a wine cellar, hanging out? And as I got older, I started realizing, like, oh my God, like, that's what life's all about. Just, you don't need much. You just need a little bit, a snack, some good company, some wine, and you can sit there and you can have the best night of your life just hanging out and just talking and sharing ideas. And every great change in the world, every great thinker was surrounded by other thinkers, other people who are sharing their ideas and having conversations and challenging each other. And that's how you develop these things. And and that's why when I got into podcasting in 2013, my co-host was like, so we're going to record ourselves talking and release it. Like, what's the appeal in that? I'm like, it's the same appeal that you have when you go out to eat with your friends and you're having a couple of drinks and you're out there. Next thing you know, hours flew by and you're just laughing, sharing stories. Maybe you're even debating, and you go in these roller coaster of conversations where you're debating, then you're laughing, and then you're talking about this, and this story leads into another story, and those are the memories that stick with you forever. Why was that pleasurable? Well, all a podcast is, if you simplify it, yeah, it can just be three old guys sitting around talking for 3 hours. But what you're doing is you're capturing those beautiful moments, and you're sharing it with the world. And I could see like the appeal in that. I'm like, I love meeting people. I love hearing their stories. I love having people who challenge my ideas and are comfortable with me challenging their ideas for the purpose of trying to filter out the bad ideas. And to me, like, I'm like, podcasting, I'm like, it's beautiful because everywhere you went, right, we lived, and this guy, Professor Michael Sandel, who was a Harvard philosopher. I never went to college, but I'm a big fan of his. And but he's a Harvard professor, and he would always talk about how he had a book called What Money Can't Buy, and he would talk about how, like, instead of having a capitalist economy, we have a capitalist society, right? And it's all about money and bottom line and how many material things you have.
Amen. I think where we really went astray was when we started substituting the language of economics for the language of the humanities, and we started gauging success using the metrics of economics. I'd like to share another, and we probably ought to close it.
Yeah, sorry, I'm holding you up for a while.
My wife is gonna. I have to eat something. I was talking to Philip Macmillan. I remember I mentioned this, the London guy, physician, and talking about just this thread that you're talking about and the problems of censorship in science, and this cult of the individual and people trying to self-promote in science. And it just came out of my mouth. I said, I didn't think about it, it just came out spontaneously. It's one of these, lizard brain things. I said, science is a song we sing together. It is in when you build the cult of personality and inject egoism into that, you destroy that relationship to sing as a choir. And that's what's really wrong, is both with the throttling of discussion and the kind of cult of personality stuff that goes on. The high profile academic thought leader that is driven to try to put down others in order to rise in the pyramid, is you lose that very interaction that you're talking about, which is the essence of what drives good science. And then I'd like to remind all of us that the root of democracy comes from Athens. And it's that what we're talking about is really kind of that Athenian Greek ideal. That is what gave rise to Western society. This idea that we as a community discuss and examine and challenge each other about ideas and logic. And some people, optimists, think that we're heading towards a new awakening. Some people see that as threatening. But what if we were to hit a new renaissance where we valued thought and discussion and interactions above the car that we drive, or how big our house is, or bumper sticker, he who dies with the most toys wins? What if we moved away from that and we valued each other a little more? So I'd like, if you don't mind, I'd like to leave on that thought.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to end it. Thank you so much, Dr. Robert Malone, for your time, your courage, for being outspoken. I had no doubt in my mind that some of these ideas were some of your personal perspectives on the world, because really there, in many cases, when you look at whistleblowers and people who go against the grain, they have much more to lose than to gain doing it. So you know that it's for moral reasons and it's for the right reasons why they are speaking out. And we need more of you. So thank you so much for taking the time, not just do my show, but doing everybody's show, that you've taken the time to talk to and helping just get this information out there. And I love the fact that, when you do these long form conversations, people can see there is no agenda here. You're just putting out your perspective, putting out your information, sharing your story, and letting people decide for themselves. And that's what we should be able to do. Unfortunately, big tech and censorship's not letting us. But thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your night, your day.
I hope we meet in Cache and kill some ginja and share good food someday.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know we kind of made fun of New Jersey a little bit. The only good thing about New Jersey is Newark, that has some good Portuguese restaurants in that little community.
Just so, and many of those come from the islands, consequent to the volcanic activity, and that's a whole nother thing. I love those islands. If I had a choice, that's where I'd go. My wife just doesn't like the sulfur smell, but many of those people immigrated to that area as a consequence of the volcanic activity. And I love the Portuguese people, and thank you for having me on.
Hey, thanks. Thank you. It was my pleasure. Enjoy and tell your wife sorry for holding you up for too long.
Okay.
Hey, enjoy the rest of your day and the weekend, and hopefully we talk again in the near future.
Likewise. Yeah. Thanks. Ciao.
Ciao. Take care.